But today we have Melissa Hoffer and David McGee and Kevin O'Keefe joining Kevin Gallagher to think about wonder and to share wonder with all of us. So Kevin's going to hold the circle for today's conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Thank all of you for being here today to explore this wonderful topic together. And thank you to our guests for being here to share about this from their own experience with wonder. We'll start with Melissa. I'll introduce each of the groups, or each of the presenters first, and then we'll have each of them share. Melissa Hoffer is the climate chief of the state of Massachusetts and recently served as the deputy general counsel of the EPA, an environmental attorney. She's also a goat farmer in Barre, Massachusetts. Kevin O'Keefe will go next. Kevin is the founder of Circus Minimus, a one-man circus in a suitcase. He has worked with students of all ages around the world to bring the circus experience into people's lives, believing that circus is a sacred circle where ordinary people do extraordinary things. David McGee is associate professor of earth science at MIT. As a paleogeologist, he works with measurements of stalagmites, lake deposits, and marine sediments to offer insights into past hydroclimate changes. And then myself, I'm a former climate change attorney and founding director of Emergent Resilience, a nonprofit focused on capacity building for the climate movement. I've also spent a lot of time in big mountains around the world, so I'll be sharing from that perspective. Melissa, would you like to start us off?
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. I'm really glad to be here with everyone this morning. Thanks to Sarah for bringing us together again, and thanks to everybody for taking time to gather. So I thought I would start out by thinking a little bit with you about what wonder is. And the dictionary defines it as a feeling of surprise that is mingled with admiration, caused by something beautiful, unexpected, unfamiliar, or inexplicable. So that made a lot of sense to me, and it got me thinking a little bit about a small watercolor postcard that a friend gave to me when I was in my early 20s. And it said, "Keep your heart in wonder at the daily miracles of your life." And for over a decade, I hung that card in my room wherever I lived. You know, this was on a move from the East Coast to the West Coast and back again, from career to career, from being single to settling down with a partner. I always had this, and I usually had it near the door jamb. So when I walked out, I read it automatically almost every day. And it's really good advice. It was familiar to me because my dad taught me early on to really keep my eyes open to wonder. Whenever we were outside, whenever we were on a walk, you know, it seemed like we would always find some cool rock, you know, maybe something that had a little quartz in it, or, you know, maybe something, you know, a beautiful leaf that had fallen from a tree, you know, or maybe you see something move and suddenly there's a Baltimore Oriole there that you might not have seen before. So I had that training really early on, and he helped me to live that way, to find joy in these daily miracles of life. You know, even when life is difficult, even when the chips are down. So when I was preparing for this talk today, I Googled that phrase, and I discovered that it is from a poem that was written by Khalil Gibran, and maybe some of you know it. The poem is called On Pain, and I'm going to read you the first stanza of it. "And a woman spoke, saying, 'Tell us of pain.' And he said, 'Your pain is the breaking of the shell that encloses your understanding. Even as the stone of the fruit must break, that its heart may stand in the sun, so must you know pain. And could you keep your heart in wonder at the daily miracles of your life, your pain would not seem less wondrous than your joy. And you would accept the seasons of your heart, even as you have always accepted the seasons that pass over your fields. And you would watch with serenity through the winters of your grief." So that seemed particularly appropriate to me as we engage this conversation of wonder at this particular moment. Keeping our hearts in wonder at the daily miracles of our life feels especially important now, as so many of we find ourselves grieving the world as we knew it. We grieve as we see human suffering from extreme climate-driven disasters all over the world at a rate we've never experienced before, particularly over this summer, as we see global average surface temperatures in September reaching 1.8 degrees centigrade or Celsius, as we read about hundreds of thousands of animals burned alive this summer in the Canadian wildfires, and as we lose beloved places. That's happening to many of us, and beloved realities. Even the rhythm of the seasons here where I live in New England is very different now. We won't return to the summers that I remember, and we won't return to the winters that I remember, and many places won't have the same snows or seasonal weather events that they used to have. Some places are losing beloved food crops. So it's a time of incredible loss as we continue to grieve a pandemic and as we see war tearing worlds apart. So this practice of wonder, and it is a practice, I want to share with you some of the daily miracles from my own life. And many of them are simple, but they are incredible miracles. So I have a few photos for you. We're going to start with some of you might know this critter. This is a wolf spider. And I just happened to be sitting on my porch the other day having a cup of tea, and I looked down and this little guy was there. And if you know wolf spiders, they don't make webs. They hunt their prey like wolves. They run it down and eat it. And they have a superpower. They have very, very keen night vision that allows them to hunt in the dark. And if you go out and look for them at night, you can find them because their eyes shine very brightly. So he sat there with us for a while, my cat and I. Unfortunately, my cat did not try to eat the spider. And it was just fabulous watching this. They're a pretty big spider and they're beautifully marked. And just watching him move around was a highlight of this particular day not long ago. And next, I want to show you a picture of two of my goats. This is Bertha, is the large white goat, and the little guy next to her is Angus. And I want to tell you a story about them. Angus was born this spring, and it was Bertha's a first-time freshener, which means this is her first kidding. And she had a very difficult birth. So it was a long, lengthy birth. There was a dead kid that didn't make it through. And then Angus was born, but he had been in the birth canal for a long time. So when he came out and I had to assist with this particular birth, he had a very, very weak nursing reflex. And I couldn't get him to latch onto Bertha's teat. And I had the vet come out just to take a look at Bertha because it had been such a difficult kidding, and she was fine. But, by then a few hours had passed and we still couldn't get Angus to nurse, and it was not looking very good. So the vet said, would I like to try to jumpstart him? You can do this with tube feeding. You basically place this very, very, because these kids are so small, they're like the size of a powder puff when they're born. You place a very, very small tube through, the baby's mouth down into the tummy, and you feed some of the mom's colostrum. So I said, okay, we'll do this. We'll see if we can get him jump started. I didn't want to continue doing that, but I thought we'd give it one try. And we milked out some colostrum from Bertha. We got a good amount into Angus, and he seemed to warm up a little bit. And through the day, I had brand new farm hens here. And as it turned out, one of them had spent a lot of time with sheep and was pretty good at getting babies latched. I'm pretty good at getting babies latched. So we spent much of that day taking turns on our bellies, showing Angus where the teat was. And little by little, he started to nurse a bit from Bertha. So I decided to sleep out with them a second night just to make sure that was going okay, because it was still a cold season and a little chilly at night. So I'm out there in my sleeping bag, and in the middle of the night, Bertha comes and wakes me up. She's just looking at me going, ba, 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 ba. So I wake up and go, okay, what's going on? What's going on? And when she saw that she had my attention, she started to push the baby toward her udder and look at me, looking at me, crying, pushing the baby to the udder. And she was telling me, Mom, I need some help. It's time for him to eat. You need to get under there and help him. So I did. I did exactly what she told me to do. And he started nursing again. And as you can see, he's grown up into a fine little guy. But to me, that was, I have been doing this for 15 years with these guys, and there's just incredible miracles that occur all the time. And if you have animals or work with animals, I know everybody has these stories as well. But it was as clear as if she had spoken to me, and I knew exactly what she wanted, and she knew exactly what she needed me to do. The next picture that I have here for you is another goat picture, another incredible story. If you look closely, this is my goat Esther, who is just about 8 years old. And if you look very closely, you can see to the right of Esther's head is a very, very tiny head. And that tiny head belongs to her granddaughter, Tundra. So the characters in this story are Grandma Esther, baby Tundra, and Mama Rachel Carson. Rachel's not in this picture. So I was out for Tundra's kidding. Tundra is a climate change baby, which is another story, but she was conceived inadvertently during that very extreme cold weather event that we had here in New England back in February of this year. It was so cold that some of the male goats had to be housed in the barn. And so you can imagine what occurred on that special night. So Rachel was born, Rachel kidded late in the season in July and gave birth to Tundra in an incredible experience where Esther was present for the whole birth. Normally the moms kid in their own paddock, but Esther and Rachel are very close, and Esther wanted to be with Rachel and Rachel wanted her mom there. So that was fine with me. And they really, Esther kept talking to Rachel. As Rachel was going into a harder labor, they start to vocalize, and Esther was responding and licking Rachel and encouraging her. And when the baby came out, both the grandmom goat and the mom goat were cleaning the baby and licking the baby and getting the baby prepared. And it was really incredible. The baby sort of had two moms right from the get-go. And so what I realized later on is that Esther, who has not had any kids for a number of years now, also spontaneously came into milk to be able to support this new grandbaby. And that's how close they were. So I actually didn't know that could happen. And I talked to my goat mentor about it, and I did a little research, and I did learn that in fact sometimes a goat that has not gone through a pregnancy can spontaneously come into milk when she perceives that there's a need for it in the herd. And so this just seemed completely miraculous to me. And as you can tell, Tundra loves her grandmom very, very much. So that was a total miracle. And they're still very, very close to this day. And the last thing I want to show you is some wonder that I saw this summer on a trip to Ireland. I'm Irish and I've always wanted to go there. And so I had this opportunity, and I traveled in West Ireland. And if you've been there, or maybe you've heard of an area called the Burren. And this is an area that is, from, if you sort of look at it from a distance, it might appear a bit barren. But when you get closer to it, you realize that this was all previously under an ocean. And it's a mountainous, rocky region now, large hills. And it is covered in these jigsaw puzzle pieces of limestone. And this is one example of them now, where, over time, the former seabed, which was made of limestone, has eroded, and it's left with these incredible shapes across the landscape. It's got one of the most unusual and diverse floral ecologies in the world, which is why I wanted to spend some time there. And you can see in it juxtaposed flowers like this next picture, which is a mountain avens. And for those of you who know this plant, You know that this is an Arctic plant. So the bottom is the flower of the mountain avens, and at the top is the little sort of cottontail. That's what happens to the flower after it's done blooming. And you can see that right next to sage, for example, which is the next picture. This is wild sage like you might find growing anywhere in Europe. And you will find also Mediterranean plants in this ecology as well. The photo that I have of it isn't very good, but it was incredible to me that you could go into this place today and see this, you know, right next to each other, these plants that normally would never occur in the same ecological environment. And here they are thriving together in this beautiful area in Western Ireland, in a place that used to be under an ocean. So it certainly gave me some perspective on geologic time. And it was interesting as well to see how, you know, the local area now is very interested in maintaining the burren as it currently is, because it's got this historic value, this archaeological value. There's a lot of ruins there as well. But it's, you know, it's quite interesting because of course it continues to evolve. So these are just some experiences of wonder that I have had just over the past few months that I wanted to share with you. I'm sure when I go outside this afternoon, I will have more. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Kevin.
Thank you so much for that, Melissa, for opening the topic for us. A beautiful start. Kevin, would you like to take us from there?
Sure. Thank you so much. Let's see. I'm Kevin O'Keefe, and the program that I wanted to speak to you about primarily today is called The Circus Kids Create. And when Sarah invited me to be a part of this little panel, it sparked a lot of thinking about my own process as an artist, and you know, what were the seeds that were planted, the seeds of wonder that I've been trying to follow for a very long time. And it's you know, I love being asked good questions, and I think that's what good friends do for one another, is ask good questions of one another. And so to think about this, I kind of like what Melissa had said. I kind of went back and looked at some of the mythologies that I was a part of, or have been a part of my life since coming of age, say in my early 20s. So let's, Kyle, can you show us the first slide that I have? Back in the 80s, sometime in the 80s, I spent a long weekend with Michael Mead. He's a storyteller, and he told the story of, he told this story, and we lived in the story during that long weekend. And the story was of the Firebird. And if you know the story, I won't tell you the whole thing, but the story of the Firebird is the image that's important here for me, is that there's a firebird that passes overhead in the dark part of the forest, and one feather from the burning breast of the firebird wafts down and is picked up by a hunter. And that symbol of picking up the feather has been this recurrent theme for me for many years. And this is a story that I tell at the beginning of any residency. I usually do 2-week-long residencies with kids in various parts of the world, in different communities. I call myself a community circus director. So this idea of the feather, that's picking up this feather, could be, it's a symbol of courage. It needs bravery, but it could be, oh, your father died, that's a feather. Oh, you're getting a divorce, that's a feather. Oh, you've got a new job, you're picking up a new feather. And there's kids that have been in my circus for many years, and we refer to each other we refer to different milestones in our lives as these feathers that we pick up. And it's an image that's in my one-man show, a kind of feather wafting down, and this idea of and it comes, I think much of what I've thought about with wonder I like this explanation that Melissa gave us, which is that it's inexplicable. I think that the language of the soul is inexplicable. I think that there's image and there's poetry and there's mythologies because we can't figure out any other way to kind of locate these things. So you can go to another slide there, Kyle. So a lot of times, this is me years ago with some friends. We made circus in this town for 20 or 25 years. And the kids that grew up in this town are the kids I was referring to. The ones who are now in their, they're in their 30s now. They're starting to have children. They're getting jobs and finding partners and all of those things. And some of them, are staying in contact with me. And when they do, they tell me about the feathers that they're picking up. Some of the images that some of the iconic images that I asked for from kids were, what were some of the greatest moments of your childhood so far? And they would say these very kind of ordinary things: riding my bike, or walking the dog, or the birthday I had, or some sporting event where I got a medal, or even just the day that we put our umbrellas aside and just danced in the rain. And so we took these images and we made, this is, obviously kind of a 3D image, but we made shadow puppets of those images for the kids. And, there's another moment where I had a whole bunch of feathers above the stage, and I just had the kids, the feathers dropped as if by magic, and the kids caught the feathers before they hit the ground. And I asked them just to sit on the edge of the stage and think about their dream, whatever their dream was. And there's these kind of iconic moments that have gone throughout my childhood. This is more of some of the one-man show. The idea of the one-man show is that I have a circus in my suitcase. And, it's an image that normally you don't think of circus and suitcase going together, but a stage designer who I worked with was kind enough to design this for me, and we put it all together. And so now I kind of go around and I play various idiots. But what's important here is, and what you can see is the relationship between these two people. This is a girl who came out of the audience. She's probably 12 or something like that. And we're creating something together. And then the space between us and the audience is the space that I'm most interested in, because the show doesn't happen. It's not me performing it, and it's not them watching. It's the show is happening on this interplay. Sometimes I think of it like a tide or a wave. And oftentimes I'll be standing on stage doing this kind of directing the audience's attention, which is frequently parents and grandparents and people who are already invested in their kids. But what I'm trying to show them is, look at this kid, look at the wonder, look at the absolute magic and joy of this kid, and see them if you can through the same lens that Melissa was inviting us, the same lens, the same practice that Melissa was inviting us to see them through. Show us another slide there, Kyle. This gesture of, I am on stage and I'm here to be acknowledged by my community as somebody special who's accomplished something. This is kind of like a signature gesture of the circus kids create. And you'll see that if I don't teach anything else to kids, I'm not interested in creating more jugglers or acrobats or things like that. But this gesture is something that every kid who comes into my circus, I'm insistent that they learn this gesture, because I want them to have that sense of they're in the spotlight and the audience is recognizing their unique magic. That's another one of, there's partner acrobatics and juggling and clowning and tight wire walking and trapeze and just about any circus skill you could think of. But there's so much joy that can be harnessed like any project that involves more people, that gives us a greater sense of we're doing this, what we couldn't do by ourselves. This is we did a whole circus based on Sergeant Pepper's, and I don't know that these kids even knew who the Beatles or Sergeant Pepper was before the show, but to me it was one of those magic moments where I get to live inside the album cover. This was again Sergeant Pepper's. So I've used different themes over the years, a lot of Greek mythology, Roman mythology, Harry Potter, anything basically that kids are stirred by, and that we can kind of locate that magic. Show me one more slide there. So Prometheus was a big part of my mythology when I was growing up. Not when I was growing up, but when I was coming of age as an artist. And for about 15 years, I did shows with fire and Prometheus stealing fire from the gods and being punished. And I did these shows all over New England. And it was I didn't know why I was so attracted to this story. I had to live inside the story for 15 years to figure out that it had to do with me and my father and authority and all of those things that I've had to deal with. Show me another slide there. This guy, Tank Man, about 35 years ago, my sister worked for the Associated Press photo library. And I was in her office one day and she said, you can have any photo you like. And I looked through some of the photos and I said, I'd love this one. I didn't know why I picked it up. But it was like Melissa's postcard. It's been on my bulletin board throughout every office or home I've had in the past 35 years. And this was always just one of these images that I just couldn't get out of my mind. And when I think about that, I also combined that right around the same time I was having dinner with some friends at a Chinese restaurant. At the time I was an actor, and we were sitting around the Chinese restaurant and they brought out the fortune cookies, and everybody's fortune went around. And they either dismissed it as something odd or inexplicable, or I don't know if it did anything for them. My fortune cookie was never wear your best pants when you go to fight for freedom. I thought of this. I've had this next to this photo for 35 years. It's brown. It's so brown now you can't even read it anymore. And I've had this image and this phrase, never wear your best pants when you go to fight for freedom. The assumption is that you're going to fight for freedom and that freedom costs something. And this experience, this seed planting experience in this Chinese fortune cookie show me the next slide, Kyle, is the reason why I created this guy. That's Iron Shaggy. And last year,
Iron Shaggy says, good morning.
That's Iron Shaggy. And Iron Shaggy, you can stop that, Kyle. You can, just keep that one. Iron Shaggy is a character from a novel I wrote during COVID. And last summer, he jumped out of the novel and onto the carport in my home, and then into the 4th of July parade here in Brattleboro. This is the librarian of our hometown, Star Latronica, a name fit for a superhero or a librarian. And in that bucket, you see the bucket in my hand, and in the bucket, I gave out prophecies for that Iron Shaggy was delivering to anyone who wanted one about their role in climate resilience. And what I hope to do is plant the same seed in those people, in young people or in old people, doesn't matter to me, but plant that same seed to them to start to think about what their role might be in climate resilience. And that's my wondrous experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I could tell from the smiles on those faces, there was a lot of magic happening in those spaces. So
Hey, Lyle.
thank you for that.
Good.
David, would you like to pick
still
up
on
from
for
there?
Saturday. I'm glad you're coming. I was going to text you.
Sure. Thank you, Melissa and Kevin, for both of those reflections. It's I just wanted to share a bit of the wonder that I experience as someone who tries to tell Earth's history. So I guess we can pull up the slides, Kyle, if you wouldn't mind just starting. And I guess as I was thinking about this, it was a real treat to think about this question of where wonder appears in this field that my career focuses on. And there are so many different ways in which it pops up that it was really fun to think about. This is a picture not of a rock that I've studied academically or geochemically or with any refined tools. It's actually a rock that's in a breakwater near my parents' house in Northwest Michigan. So it's just sort of casually strewn by the side of the road. And as you can see, it's these beautiful little hexagonal corallites from a coral head that grew about 400 million years ago. And, I think, every rock around us reminds us of the immensity of time that came before us. And this certainly is particularly clear in evoking a world, this coral head that was growing, if growth rates were similar to today, somewhere around several decades, maybe the length of a human life. One particular little snapshot of a tropical shallow ocean 400 million years ago, with continents nearby, continents that were newly populated with plants and animals after 4 billion years of having nothing growing on them, 4 billion years of stillness. It's just remarkable to be sort of transported and looking at a single rock into the world that created it. And of course, remarkable just to think about the fact that 400 million years ago seems like a very long time ago, but if we put it on a timeline, that would be 90% of the way from the Earth's formation to the present. And as you start to dig into these tools, these markers of these former worlds, you start to see this remarkable variety of conditions that the Earth has experienced. So in the next slide, there's two pictures. One on the left is this beautiful fossil palm that looks very much like what you'd see if you went down to southern Georgia or Florida today, but which was deposited in rocks that at that time, with this about 50 million years ago, were close to the Arctic Circle. And indeed, in the same formations, you find fossil crocodiles pointing to this world that was much, much warmer than today. We think about 30 degrees Fahrenheit higher in terms of mean temperature. And on the right are these really mixed up grain sizes, this very fine clay, this kind of brick colored, and then these big clasts, cobbles next to an Australian coin for scale. This period about 600 million years ago. This is a glacial deposit. And it was deposited, from what we can tell, at sea level at the equator, pointing to a time when the Earth was completely covered by ice. So you get this sense of this remarkable variety of climates and conditions that the Earth has been through prior to our own time. There's a question here, I think, for me as to where the difference is between intellectual interest and wonder. And certainly a large part of this is intellectual interest, but as I was thinking about this, and as I've been just sort of reflecting on my own path over the last few years, I've realized how deeply rooted my own work is in one, and the work of the students that I work with and the other faculty around me, the people we interact with, how deeply rooted it is in wonder, and not just the kind of the satisfaction that you would get from finishing a difficult crossword puzzle, or figuring out a detective story. So, and part of my realization that my mom was clearing out her basement, and the next slide, there's a picture. Oh, sorry. I wanted to point out one more example of big changes, but this is a much more recent example of change in the Great Salt Lake Basin in Utah. These shorelines that are carved into these hills. This is a 1,000-foot lake that was there around the time when the first humans were coming into this area about 15,000 years ago. So these remarkable changes are just written on the landscape. But just to get back to my own path and wonder, the next slide, I think, shows a picture of me in first grade with a book I wrote. I'm on the left there, and this book was about. I think we were just supposed to write an adventure story, and my book was about time travel, and the lead character went back to 1 billion years ago. So there was something about this that was tugging on me from really early on. And I have no idea what started it. It was probably, museum visits or something, but there's something that's much more deeply rooted than just kind of intellectual games, I guess. And so, and this wonder, of course, is reinforced by the places that, the places that we have the privilege to visit as we do this work of reconstructing how Earth's climate has changed through time. So in the next slide, you'll see a picture of a former graduate student, Gabriela Cerrado Marx, in a cave in northeastern Mexico, where we've been studying stalagmites that preserve some of the only records we'll ever have of how rainfall and water availability in that region has varied in the past, prior to the instrumental record. In the next picture, you'll see a picture of my another former graduate student at 15,000 feet looking at ancient lake deposits in the Andes from a time when this region was much wetter than it is now. And in the next slide, you'll see a different sort of archive that we use, mud taken from 3 to 5 kilometers below the ocean surface that preserves this layered record of past climate changes. And we can sieve through that mud. And one of my students has recently been looking at these beautiful little sand-sized fossils that you can pull out of there. You can go to the next slide. This particular fossil was, and sorry, the focus isn't perfect here, but this little fossil was living on the seafloor 100,000 years ago. And we can make measurements to determine how warm the Earth, or how warm the deep ocean was at that time, how much carbon it was holding, and a variety of other parameters. So there is a kind of wonder in our ability to just the kind of the collective ingenuity of being able to tell the story of times when there weren't humans around to recording the history. And the next slide is one more, picture of an archive we work with. Is a stalagmite that we've cut open from southern Mexico. Again, one of the only archives that we'll ever have of past rainfall in this region. I want to close with one place that I think to me brings out particular wonder. It's a place I had that I was able to visit in college. It's in eastern Italy, in the Apennine Mountains. So you can see this road cut here, and there's limestone rocks that are tilting from the kind of the lower left to the upper right. And so these were deposited on the seafloor and then were uplifted and faulted and tilted. So the older rocks are kind of down and to the right here, and the younger rocks are up and to the left. And just to the, and if you go to the oldest rocks, sort of on the right side of the image, you'll see that they're full of fossils, ancient plankton that built little shells and then fell to the seafloor and were cemented into this limestone mud that then became limestone. And then as you move upward in the section, sort of to younger and younger rocks, you'll pass just kind of a gash that you can see there to the right of that sign in the bottom of the picture, a gash kind of going parallel to the bedding from the lower left to the upper right, and where it's just kind of a dark little hole there. And that's because it's a little 1 to 2 centimeter layer thick that's made of clay. And then as you go above that layer, you get to more limestone, but limestone that initially has no fossils in it. And then gradually you get tiny little fossils of the single species, and then a few more species and a few more species. And eventually, as you go to younger and younger rocks, you return to much more diverse set of fossils, but different species than there were before the clay layer. And that clay layer, of course, is the Cretaceous Paleogene boundary. That is the end Cretaceous extinction, when the dinosaurs died and over half of all species on Earth. And it's just preserved there in this, sort of unassuming road cut with a little sign to mark it. But that single clay layer, of course, contains this cataclysm, the biggest change in life and in Earth's environment that's happened in the last 250 million years prior to our own time. And the reason I chose this zoomed out picture, of course, is because it includes markers of our own time. This Roman aqueduct up at the top, and then this modern road down to the right. And I can't look at this layer of clay that demarcates this extraterrestrial impact without thinking about what our own layer will look like. The layer that reflects our own time. What will it look like in the future? And I'll close with one final picture. This is from a geologist blog that I was able to find, and he had a picture of his very cute child, sitting on top of this, the place where this clay layer occurs. It's deep in that gash right behind the boy, and just this marker of cataclysmic change 66 million years ago, and then a boy who's living in this current time of remarkable change, and how difficult it is to manage this juxtaposition between the two, the amount of time held in the rocks behind him, and then the amount of time that of his generation and of our modern this century of remarkable change. So and that's not something that's easy for me to put into words, but it is something that just gets me wondering. So I'll close there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, David. What an incredible journey into deep time and how it intersects with our own moment on this incredible planet. And I'll take it from there. Kyle, if you could put the first of my slides up, that would be great. So I was fortunate when I was young to be introduced by my uncle to spending time in high alpine areas. We were typically going to the Sierra Nevadas in California. And this is one of my favorite places. The Sierras are this 400-mile long block of granite that sits in Eastern California. And this is Thousand Island Lake. It lies along the John Muir Trail. And the peak to the left is Mount Ritter. And so this is a shot around dawn. And you can just see the way the granite soaks up the light. And the Sierras are known as the range of light. And so for me to go to these places that very much, I'm drawn in particular to the very high altitude places, places above the tree line, and to see that the way that they change, these liminal spaces, for me, they feel like a place in between. And to see the way that they change and shift over time is so, powerful and beautiful. If you could go to the next slide, Kyle. This is another picture of the same place. That's Mount Ritter. This is an evening shot on one of the little islands there in Thousand Island Lake. And so I've been through here quite a few times, and it's just a place that always blows me away. And as Melissa mentioned in that wonderful definition of wonder, the beauty, that's such a core component of this experience of wonder. If you could go to the next one, Kyle. And so this is the Everest panorama. So you have Everest on the right side of the frame there, Nutse would be the next one over, and I can't remember the names of the other peaks at this point. And so I've had this chance to visit all these incredible places, and this one is, one of those powerful places on the planet. And here you can see the mix of place and culture. The unique way that culture shows up in these places as well is a really powerful part of it. And for me, one thing that I find so powerful about these places is the way there's so few ingredients involved. The way I kind of describe it, it's rock and water and time, and yet you come up with such unique, mind-blowing features that are different in every place around the world. And you can see some similarities, but each is its own place with its own personality, its own story, and then you have the culture layered over the top of it that even adds to that more. If you could go to the next one, Kyle. We won't spend long here, but this is Cerro Torre in the Andes. It's in Western Argentina near the border with Chile. And just, to me, a beautiful set of peaks here. If you could go to the next one, Kyle. And so another reason that I find these places so full of wonder for me is the way that they change my relationship to things that I might otherwise take for granted. And so this is along the Drakensberg on the border of South Africa and Lesotho, and I did a 180-mile solo trek along the edge of this escarpment that is essentially, if you cut the Grand Canyon in half. So there's a 4,000-foot wall rising out of the Underberg of South Africa to become the plateau of Lesotho. And much of the trail follows the edge of this incredible escarpment. And so this is a shot I took towards the end of the day, and the clouds would frequently come in across the Underberg and just slam into the escarpment. And it created this kind of surreal experience of staring down at the clouds and seeing my shadow reflected onto the top of the clouds, which is not an experience I have too often. And so to just shift that frame for me. And I'll give you, if you could go to the next one, Kyle. This is another view of the same thing. And it also, this brings up for me kind of the fractal nature of our world. So this, to me, was the image of a lake, water lapping up against the edge of a lake, and yet it's the clouds. And it had that same motion that you would see in water as well, of the clouds lapping up against the edge of these cliffs as I was hiking along. Next, Kyle. So here's another one taken. This was in the Annapurna Sanctuary in Nepal, taken at somewhere around 18,000 feet. And this interaction with clouds again. So I spent maybe 4 days in the sanctuary here. And each day there would be these clouds that would move up the valley to fill up the entirety of the sanctuary and then move back down. And it was as if this entire massif was breathing, this cycle of inhale and exhale throughout the day. And again, the fractal nature of that experience and just the awe-inspiring aspects of that. And the framing of this shot, I had somebody else take it, but was the director of photography, if you will. And it kind of, for me, gave that sense of my scale relative to what was happening around me. And the sanctuary here is a set of 8,000 meter peaks that kind of form a circle, and you can kind of hike up. And so, yeah, just incredibly powerful. If the fog and cloud was gone, you would just see these stunning white peaks, similar to what you saw with that image of Mount Everest. And next, Kyle. So here's one at sea level, maybe taken about 1.5 feet above sea level. I had the opportunity a while ago to sail across the Atlantic Ocean, and this is taken from almost exactly the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And so we were caught in doldrums for 2 days, and this wild and powerful and rambunctious sea that often had 3-meter swells that threatened to swallow the boat, and we were just staring up at as they came at us. Calmed down. The winds died. We were in this was probably a high pressure area, and so the air was completely dead, completely still. The current died, the swells died, and this picture doesn't really sell how still it was, but to see this massive ocean for 2 days completely still. And there was an eeriness to it that was accompanied by wonder. So just this different flavor of wonder in the way that the world shows up around us in these different ways that kind of challenge our preconceptions about what it should be and what it needs to be. And that has stuck with me ever since. And so next, Kyle, and we'll do these next two pretty quickly. Next couple. This is, I was caught in a thunderstorm near Sossusvlei in the Namib Naukluft Desert in Namibia. And so as we're trying to get out of this thunderous storm, and then as the clouds were clearing towards the end of the day, we got this incredible rainbow accompanied by the sun. The reverse shot behind me shows this incredible light on the clouds. And so again, something that's challenging my preconceptions about what a place is. And so here I'm bringing these next two in for the kind of cultural influences in these places that you might not expect. And so this is an Incan road through the Andes. This was on a trek called the Alpamayo Circuit. And Nevado Alpamayo, which isn't pictured here, a German mountaineering group went around the world in the 1960s to find the most beautiful mountain in the world. And they decided Nevado Alpamayo was it. I kind of reject the entire premise of that project, but that was how I ended up in that place. Next, Kyle. And so this is an ancient piece of Puebloan pottery that is in a little side canyon off of the Grand Canyon. While rafting through the Colorado River, we were taken there by a friend, and she knew of this piece that was kind of still in place after 900 years. And so this sacred piece that somebody had put there and was still there for us to see and experience all these years later. And then one other piece. I said there were primarily 3 ingredients. There often will be a fourth, but the other living beings that inhabit these places. And so here's this little tuft of flowers poking out on Forester Pass at above 13,000 feet in the Sierra Nevada, just somehow making a living and thriving in this place that is so, harsh and hostile to life in general. And then one more along those lines. This is a place called Elizabeth Pass in the Sierras, and the way this riot of flowers, wildflowers that spring up in the spring, and whenever that is, as you're moving up, spring is at different times in different places as you're moving through different altitudes. And so seeing the way it just kind of rolls through a place as you ascend or descend. And then some of the animal life. So this is an alpine parrot in the Sierra, not in the Sierras, in New Zealand. I hiked across the South Island of New Zealand. And these were some incredible beings that I think they're in a similar niche, ecological niche to crows would be, but they're an alpine parrot that inhabits much of the Southern Alps within New Zealand. And then one more this is from Nepal, and these are tracks of a snow leopard that were in freshly fallen snow as I was ascending one of the big passes, somewhere in the neighborhood of 20,000 feet. And so to just recognize that a being like that, and so many of them can make a living in a place like that and thrive in a place that I have to work so hard to survive. And one last piece before we get to this video, I also want to share, for me, there's a significant healing component of time in nature. I, spent much of my career as an attorney in Washington, D.C. working on climate change. And I watched, during the Obama administration, the failure of that project of federal climate change legislation, and really had no tools for grappling with the enormity of that failure. And so in response, I ended up, after a period of years, leaving that, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't have tools to deal with that experience at that point. And so what I did was I spent 3 years traveling the world, and many of these pictures are from that experience, getting into these high places. And it was very much a healing place for me. I didn't know it at the time and wouldn't have described it in that way then, but it was a way that the natural world, that exposure to wonder, to something larger, inexplicable, could help me heal that experience that I went through. And it's always been that way for me and is still. And so, as Melissa said, a practice, it's something that I need on a regular basis to have these experiences. And so, Kyle, if you'd just play the video, I'll let the video do the talking from here, and then we can transition out. All right. Thank you, Kyle. And so maybe with that, do we want to maybe bring one word in or a quick statement from each of our guests this morning on what they heard, and then we can transition to the breakout groups, and from there we'll take a quick break for about 5 minutes. Any quick reflection on what we've seen and heard? And if not, maybe we can just go to our break then. Kyle, if you could send us to our breakouts, and then we'll take about 5 minutes. Maybe if we could all return at, I believe that would be 12:05 for those on the East Coast and 9:05 for the West Coast. And I'll let the others figure out exactly what that would be for them. And we'll see you in the breakouts. Thank you all so much.